Hi, this is Alex Rodriguez from Secure Ideas / Professionally Evil, and this week we're going to be going over stdin. So let's go ahead and hop into the code. I messed up on one of the bullet points for this version, so I'm going to the master branch instead. So we're in week 7, and this is stdin, or as a lot of people in the bash or scripting community refer to it as stdin. And the prerequisites for this is going to be the bash setup, links right there, and also a program that we're going to be using is called recon-ng, and I'm going to show you a practical application of using stdin for scripting practices with recon-ng. So, why is this important? It helps you level up your bash scripting. It's really awesome to be able to just kind of see what's possible inside of bash and scripting. And then lastly, it's very helpful and useful for daily activities if you need to, say, grab a bunch of different IP addresses from a file that has a mix of IP addresses and words. It's really useful for that. I use it pretty much all the time since I work on Secure Ideas' infrastructure. So, now we're going to hop in over here. Alright, so we've got our bash environment set up, and the first thing we're going to do is do this git clone, and this is a bashism that essentially takes the last variable from the previous command and does a string manipulation that is built into bash expansion. We're not going to get too deep into it. We'll go over more about string manipulation later on. But essentially it just clones the repo and then CDs into the repo's name, recon-ng. So we're going to make one slight alteration to their Docker file to suit our needs, and then we're going to go ahead and run the build command because this is going to take a while. If you ever need to essentially rerun that command again, you can just run this command to replace it with the original Docker file, and then go ahead and run the said command again. So one of the things that I wanted to mention was something that essentially the stdin or stdin thing is actually technically referred to is called a file descriptor, and bash has a few different file descriptors. So some of the file descriptors by number, which is what they technically are referred to whenever you pass them in to different arguments for bash, are 0, which is stdin, 1, which is standard out, 2 is standard error. So standard out is the text that normally gets outputted whenever a command executes. Standard error is whenever there's, which it's kind of dependent on making sure the actual program implements that properly, but ideally 2 is standard error, which is whenever an error happens, it outputs specifically the error to stderr instead of stdout. So that way you can have 2 different files that you can send your log data to, and then also your error data to. So to show you a few different examples of the stdin. So there are 3 different types of stdin redirectors that you can use, and for example, I'm going to do bash, and then we can do something like echo, and then we're going to read in from the vagrant file, and that should just echo that just essentially regurgitates out the information that gets sent from stdin out to your terminal. And as you can see, we are reading from a file. So that's what the single alligator mouth or angled bracket is used for. The double angled bracket is used for what's called a heredoc. We're actually going to take a look at that a little bit later on in this video. And then the 3 redirectors is referring to passing a string argument. So an example is if we take this command right here, take that command right there, you can see that we have the 3 redirectors, and what that's going to do is tr essentially substitutes characters, and we're going to substitute it for a new line. So it will print hello there with a new line instead of a space. So let's go ahead and go back to the Docker container. Cool, so everything's successfully built. Alright, so the first or the second example that I wanted to show you was a really cool trick that I found out while trying to script using recon-ng, because I like to script all the things. Alright, so we are connecting to the Docker container, which is the command that we ran here. And then if we do an ls just to show us what's there, we're going to do recon-ng, and this is just to show you that, here, make it a little bit nicer, there we go. Recon-ng executes properly. This is no trick, I didn't modify it at all or anything. Alright, and so now that you can see that I successfully launched the program, we're going to just take a look at their help, and what we're going to end up doing is using the marketplace command, and we're going to end up doing install all. So we're going to exit out of here real quick. Recon-ng has a specific flag for reading in what they call a script, because you can output a resource file. Sorry, not script. You use the script command to record a resource file. But they have a tac-r flag, which loads commands from a resource file, and this is kind of annoying if you want to try and automate this, because it won't take in normal direct stdin. I have to use a little trick that is technically still stdin, but actually executes a command in what's called a subshell. The subshell execution happens, and during that process of subshell execution, it actually creates a temporary file for it to hold the contents in. And then we've got the file redirector that we had talked about earlier from this section, that reads in that file from the shell execution. So we're going to, of course I didn't copy in the whole command. There we go. So now we're going to execute recon-ng, telling it, hey, I want to load commands from a resource file, and then the resource file is actually the printf command that executes. And then once we hit enter, there we go. It starts to, as you can see right here, it said marketplace install all, which is what we passed in right here, marketplace install all. And then right after that is a new line character. And then after it finishes installing all the different modules, as long as it installs successfully, it will exit, and then another new line character to tell it, hey, this is the last command, and I want you to actually essentially hit enter for the command to properly execute. And all of this red is just essentially telling me that I don't have keys or API keys installed for those different modules. But as you can see, everything installed. So we can go to recon-ng. You can see all the red stuff still, and you can see recon modules 79, disabled modules 21. So it installed all the different modules for recon-ng. So now we're going to exit out of the recon-ng Docker container, and now we're going to go into using stdin through a pipe. And the using it in as a pipe is essentially taking the contents of this command and essentially doing the same thing that we did, but it formats it and executes it in a little bit different way. So this is a command from my blog where I talk about how it's okay to use curl essentially by piping it into bash if you know exactly what's executing. And specifically the command that I was trying to showcase was this one that's commented out up here, and specifically the bash-x command, which essentially gives you more verbose output, but you can check out my blog for more information on that, and we're going to go over more about that later on in a different video. But specifically for this, what we're going to do is this link right here is a short URL that you can just go to get.io and create any type of short URL from any type of GitHub URL. So it's specifically a URL shortener for GitHub. So it's a shortened URL for a bash script that I had made that essentially I use for converting some information to hex for DHCP options to pass a specific route over the network. It's not really important, but essentially it's a bash command or a bash script that I'm pulling down from GitHub. So if you do this, you can see this is the bash script, and so we are going to just pipe that directly in the bash. And specifically the bash tech or -s option tells it to read everything in from stdin, which is what we're doing with the pipe character in the previous command. So read the actual script from stdin, and then anything else that's passed is actually considered a parameter to go into the script that got passed in from stdin. So specifically for this one, if you do just hit enter, that's the hex that gets outputted for the DHCP option information. And in that blog I actually linked to a little bit more detailed post specifically about this. I was just trying to give an example of what would make running, that was a part of what would make running piping curl into bash okay. But that's a second example of using stdin in different bash commands, and this is a lot more common example that people probably know of. Some projects tell people to pipe curl into bash for installing different things. Alright, so now another example, and this is the heredoc that I was mentioning before. And I've used this command, or I've used this application of the command when I'm trying to install a bunch of different dependencies. Specifically, recently I was installing OpenVAS 20.08 from 20.08 from source, and so I was going to all the different repos that were required for installing it and grabbing all the different dependencies, and some of the repos had overlapping dependencies, so I didn't want to duplicate the entry. I mean, apt is smart enough to duplicate the entry itself. It's just for my scripting practices I like to make things as short as possible. So I specifically used this command to essentially deduplicate or dedupe the packages that I had collected from the different GitHub repos. So just go ahead and paste this command in here right like that, and as you can see, the sort command that I had passed the tacu or unique flag to deduplicated all of the different entries, removing the CMake, the extra GCC, and so this is really useful if you want to go ahead and just use it for different applications, for deduplicating applications that you have to install. And another example we'll get into right after this about grabbing IP addresses. So this was another example of essentially combining that heredoc stdin to the pipe character, so that way we can, instead of new line delimit them, do a space delimit. So you see how each of the packages are on a new line. Instead of that, I just wanted to show that you could essentially pipe after the heredoc, which is not necessarily obviously apparent that you can do that. And you can just do this, and then if you hit enter, you can see that instead of it being each remaining string is no longer on its own line, it's space delimited. And it actually kind of trims off the last one here as well, but I mean, you can just copy around that. So another example of using the heredoc that I use pretty much daily for different infrastructure tasks is grabbing IP addresses. So this is a grep command that uses Perl regex, and I go into more information about that right here. So we're not going to get into that. But essentially it uses the Perl regex to specifically grab different IP addresses, and I found this really useful whenever a client has given us a file of different IP addresses or IP address ranges, because specifically this section right here says grab something like this to where it's getting the actual subnet as well. So it will grab both IP addresses and then IP addresses with subnets. So this is really useful, like I was saying, for customers that give you a file, but say it's got a bunch of extra text in there to explain what each IP address range or IP address is for. You can essentially grep around those just IP addresses and strip out all the different text that's in there. So we can go ahead and enter, And as you can see, it grabbed all the different IP addresses and the subnetted one as well, with the included subnet. And that can go for, like, if we did a /24 instead of /8, it'll grab the 24 as well. So lastly, we're going to go over another nuance of this specific command is called the mapfile command, and this is actually a built-in bash command. So if we do help mapfile, you can see that it is a built-in command to bash itself. So an example here is just to, this is the preferred way of how you create an array from executing a command. Some people, what they'll do is they'll do something like this. Well, technically this will execute. Sometimes things don't get quoted properly, or, oh, actually, this needs to be like that. There. Technically this will create an array, or it should create an array, but there's actually a resource that I list down here. I meant to list down here. I will update this post, but I can just Google for it real quick. So, the problematic code is like how I was showing right here. You execute a command and you want to turn that execution into an array that is new line delimited. So as you can see here, requires at least bash 4.0. But what happens is, instead of the possibility for things to not get quoted properly, if you use the mapfile command, everything gets put in the array like how it's supposed to. So we do echo array and then index 0, and that will give us hello. And then we do index 1, and that will give us there. So this is, the mapfile command is really useful. I'll link to this in the repo as well. I have another article for parsing mapfile. Yeah. So this mapfile command will actually essentially try to, or it will show you a bunch of different environment variables. It'll take all those environment variables and unset them, and I've kept a few default and necessary environment variables. But if we do this, this will assign it to an array, and then we can do echo envars, and that will print out all the different environment variables that are not like necessarily default for bash. And you can, just to make sure you have a clean environment, you can do the unset command and execute the same thing that I did up here. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to mess with this. I can, well, actually, I'll just go ahead and do it. So now if we do env, you can see I only have the environment variables that I had specified here still left. So just to make sure I don't screw up my environment, I'm going to go ahead and exit out of Vagrant and then Vagrant SSH back in. But the mapfile command is really powerful for creating different arrays. And I've got a bunch of different commands here. The one that isn't necessarily applicable to us right now, but is really awesome, is that they actually created a GitHub issue about this as well, that whenever people were trying to parse the AWS, what is it? No, whenever they were trying to create an array of variables from the AWS Secrets Manager, after they had gone through some parsing using JQ, since it was JSON data, things weren't getting quoted properly, and so specifically for them, the AWS command was failing, but if you use the map file instead of the way that they were doing it, which was the way that shellcheck was recommending against, it will actually quote everything properly, and you can do your AWS CloudFormation deploy with the properly quoted map files. And well, that is everything for the Bash Tricks video today. I will see you next time. Take care. Bye.